Great. I think that's a wonderful start, wonderful opening remarks. I'll turn to Mr. Suresh Prabhu with that. And really, Mr. Prabhu, you are in charge of one very, very critical sector in India. And today, when we talk of India, one of the things that's really pulling up India is the entire of infrastructure sector. And India badly needs infrastructure. Many sectors within the infrastructure span is doing well. Your sector is doing well, and you are requiring international expertise. You are requiring international funding. And how is your sector, therefore, especially to begin with? And I know, given your capacity and your intellect, you go much beyond railways in your thinking. And I would urge you to do that while you talk, to say that how can India really take maximum advantage, and how would you really look at railways in particular, but generally in the infrastructure sector, to Singapore? And you heard what the minister just now talk about, the type of relationship that one really looks to build upon. So your views, Mr. Prabhu.
Thank you very much, and I would welcome the minister to India again. Thank you for coming, and this is a very interesting conversation we are having on the eve of the visit of a Prime Minister, which will, I'm sure, seal the deal on many areas to make sure that this age-old relationship, it becomes more relevant in the modern times. So we look forward to that. Of course, I fully agree with you. There are several areas in which one can learn from Singapore. Not just India, but Singapore is a shining example of how one should succeed in the most adverse situation. And when you don't have any of your own resources, how do you actually leverage the other resources to develop your own geography? That is something which is a great example, and therefore it's an inspiration for all developing countries, and of course an envy of all the developed countries. So we really look forward to learning from you and working with you. Some of the areas in which railways, for example, you mentioned, of course, knowing the length and breadth of your country. Obviously, the railway network is not as large, but still you have one of the most efficient public transport system anywhere in the world. And that is but extremely efficient public transport. So I think now in the world, we need to learn about how to use more public transport, because the greenhouse gas emission which cause all the kinds of problems that we are all facing could be addressed largely by moving away from private transport to public transport. And therefore, in public transport, you have actually shown a way. In that context, I was saying also your other great achievement is in development of a city. How should urban development take place? So I'm very happy that you're participating in some of the smart city development projects. So station development, which is India's one of the big priority. We have 400 railway stations which we want to redevelop in the next few years. So one of that area in which I think Singapore can offer a lot of expertise and participation. Secondly, in infrastructure growth, we need a lot of capital. And Singapore is one of the most preferred international destinations for the banking and finance. So I think we can use a lot of Singapore-based organizations, not just to source capital from Singapore alone, but global capital from Singapore as a destination. In fact, I had a very interesting conversation on this with the Deputy Prime Minister recently, and he also agreed that this could be a great possibility. So I think as far as railways are concerned, these are the two major areas in which we can definitely take part and work together. But also one of the areas which is extremely critical for India is water. And I know you have been, we really used to import water from Malaysia. Then again, yeah, and you re-export to them and after you process it. So I think another very interesting thing is why you could now are becoming self-reliant to a great extent is because you are able to capture all the rainwater. So rainwater harvesting is more than 90%. Also you recycle the water, also use everything that is available to do it. I think that is another area in which we can definitely would like to work with you. And of course there are many areas of technology, even designing of modern cities and everything else that goes with this. So I think we can really look forward to doing that. And you mentioned about the similarities. So I think my name is synonymous with your name. Prabhu and Ishwar are the same as far as we believe. So I think there is so much one can do together, and therefore we really look forward to working with you.
Great, great. Uh, while I'm tempted to take this discussion towards one very important issue, which was also touched upon on funding, but I'd like to change the topic a little bit and really go into both our ministers to talk about one very important aspect as I see it, and that's on people development and people. And we talked about India today faces a big challenge on seeing how it can really make its demography into demographic dividend. And over the last couple of years, one has seen a renewed focus on into this entire aspect of skilling. And we are seeing a huge government mission, a private-public partnership, which has also been very strongly initiated in India to see how we can bring in the demographic challenge into a demographic dividend. Railways is the biggest employer, and my offline discussions with the railway minister, I have often talked about training and skilling in that entire gamut, which is going to be so very critical. Singapore has done so well and excellent. It's a role model for the rest of the world, and we look up to Singapore in its entire skilling ecosystem that it has brought up. We'd like to know from you, Mr. Minister, sir, that how do you see Singapore contributing to this space, as also seeing how it can look at this as to be an opportunity also for Singapore? And I'll turn over to the railway minister to really know about what's really happening in India.
You know, this is really a very interesting opportunity. As you can see, of course, we are also not going to remain young for life, but for next 30 years, there's a window available wherein India's average age will be working age for a long time to come, at least for 3 more decades. And that particular time, the same period, particularly in Asia, most of the countries will be aging considerably. Particularly Japan is already aging. China will also have the same problem in the next few years' time. So probably the opportunities will not necessarily be in terms of exporting a manpower into that country, because that's something becomes a sometimes very sensitive issue. If you want to bring people from other countries and work with your country, work permit, many issues come up. But offering services offshore from this place, for example, aging population of Japan, they would need care. So maybe medication can be given, but even somebody has to monitor whether medication is given or not. And now you are using robots, but that they have a limitation. So can we not use the potential of Indian young population to take care of so many needs which will be required in those countries? So that's one area. Secondly, as we can see now, normally Indian population was also participating in the global supply chain, particularly in the services sector, by mainly doing the back office jobs to begin with. That's how it started. But now it has graduated into knowledge outsourcing to a great extent. But I can see great opportunities for a country like Singapore, wherein you have very strategically located. You are in ASEAN, but also close to the East Asia, which is also growing pretty fast, and also such good relations with almost all the countries in the region. So can we not use your technology and India's manpower to also look at servicing the other geographies by creating some niche areas where it is actually needed, particularly in the medical sector also. I mean, I'm just thinking aloud. Also in banking, I can see banking as it is evolving now. After some time, it is going to be completely different, including processing of loans, processing of information that clients will offer to you. Somebody has to apply human mind to it. That can be done anywhere offshore and can be done. So I think there are many areas like this which will emerge. And I think if there's a partnership with Singapore, which has a smaller population, with India's larger population, but you have great technological advancement and also the evolution. That's very important because you understand the value chain pretty well because you evolved, as you said earlier, from not so developed country to a far developed country.
You've covered a lot of ground. Let me start by talking about the training point. I think it's important to invest in people. And education and training is the most important way of enabling their capacity to do things that are valuable and also that will create value for themselves and their families and so on. So we, just going back to a comment that Minister Prabhu made earlier, in Singapore, the main resource we've invested in is in our people. So we've really tried to see how we can raise the education level and in particular certain skill sets in order to get our people prepared, not just for the economy of today, but also for possible changes in the future. So if you look at it from that angle, I think in India, skills development and training has to be guided and informed by where the industry development is going to be. Because I think the most frustrating thing for an individual is if you go for a course, you attend the course and you come out and there's no relevant job. Why did I do this and why did I waste all my time and effort to do that? So in a way, the two are very interlinked. So if, for example, the priority is in the area of manufacturing, then those manufacturing clusters become a very good magnet for trained, skilled manpower. You've got to find a way to work with the industry there with the education or training providers in order to create the link. This is what we do in Singapore very often. We have a regular, constant dialogue between the industry and our education institutions to make sure they are staying current and the skills that they are developing in our people can be applicable in the market. It's also relevant for the public sector. So, by the way, we still import water from Malaysia, just for the record. But one of the reasons why we've been able to develop alternative sources of water, whether it's desalination and new water, which is really recycled water, apart from our own reservoirs, has really been the capacity in our public sector, amongst our officials, to understand that we need to have a good set of policies. And one of the most important policies is how you price water. Because if you price it too cheap or too low or you subsidize it, then the cost of desalination or new water, for example, is a lot higher and it will never be viable. So you have to price it in a way that reflects the true costs and then have policy consistency and sustainability and work with the industry to create the larger environment. So I think this is where it's also about investing in capacity building in officials, which we do all the time. And so I think where Singapore and India already are collaborating, for example, in technical skills development, it's a very valuable space. We are investing quite a lot in some areas. And when you look ahead into a digital economy where almost every sector is going to have some level of impact through digitization, then I think getting the population skilled for that, ready for that, is going to be a very important part of it. And I think in the context of India, you already have a very deep IT capability. It's really how that IT capability can be transformed, because it's, for example, how do you get a data analytics support for manufacturers? How do you do market analysis and data analytics for consumer businesses? And then use that to drive not just marketing, but actually in product development and strategies. So this is going to be a big area. And I think I agree with you, Minister, that there's a lot of potential to collaborate, because at the end of the day, we are a very small city, and in the scheme of things, we have limits as to what we can accomplish. But in collaboration with others, both in the private sector and with other countries, we think there's a lot more scope to do, in terms of some of these new areas that can be exploited.
I'll pick it up from one of the comments you made about that you are a small city, a city-state. And here, what's happening in India, we have 29 states competing with each other. And there are, we say that there are 29 mini-Indias. And many of them are looking at you. And many of them are wanting to work with you. I mean, one outstanding example has been when a new state is being built up in Andhra Pradesh, they have turned to you. And there are many others who are looking at you. And with this competing situation in India, which is a great story for India, actually, that's one of the best things that have happened in India the last 2 years, is this competition among states, which is really letting the growth story of India go to the states and giving some phenomenal results. But for Singapore to focus on, and I'm asking this question to understand, how would you decide which state to go? I'm not asking about the names of the states, But what are those competitive indices that you really look at when you decide, yes, Singapore is going to work with this one? So what is it that you are looking at? Today, a lot of the states are really trying to sharpen their competitive edge, and your comments would be very, very important.
So let me put it this way. We are a small place. We have limited bandwidth and resources. So whatever we do, whether as companies or as at the government level, I think we have to be quite clear that we can do this and actually add value. Otherwise, you just spread yourself too thin and you leave a lot of unfulfilled promises. So that's really not a very desirable way to move forward. So in deciding where and how, I think there are a few, and I would imagine they're quite self-evident. You want to work in sectors or in areas where you actually bring a value add that's clear and that value is appreciated by the counterparty. You want to work in an area where also the regulatory and political environment is supportive, so that when you get into, because a lot of this is not in the ideation stage, it's actually in the execution. And it's in execution that you run into all the operational issues, including regulatory compliance and so on. So you need to find ways where there is that support from a regulatory and conducive environment. And then finally, of course, the leadership at the political level, at the government level. So in the context of India, for example, there's strong political leadership at the center, and many states have embarked on certain ideas. So I think these are all things that any reasonable business would take that into account. But certainly in the context of Singapore, when we look at it, because we want to make sure, because this is, if it's a G2G effort especially, it's got to be one that is well calibrated in order to bring clear benefits and value that both sides will appreciate.
We have very limited time at our hand, and I'll really like to bring in some of our participants from the floor to take advantage and pose any issues or questions to our two honorable ministers. Anyone from the floor would like to go? Go ahead.
My name is H.K. Agarwal. I am a chartered engineer. My question is to Mr. Suresh Prabhu. You are thinking of importing railways from Spain. Isn't it possible for you to fund double line? You see, our freight and passenger train are running on single pair of line. You see, it is economical to add another freight corridor like in other countries. Then you can automatically speed up the normal trains instead of spending on importing trains from abroad. Thank you.
See, there's already, of course, as you're aware, there is one dedicated freight, two dedicated freight corridors which are coming up. Hopefully, we want to complete them in the next 3 years. But we are also planning 3 more. So there's going to be connecting all parts of the country. And in addition to that, as you mentioned, we are also thinking of going beyond the borders. So that's something which is inevitably has to happen over a period of time. So already we are connecting our neighbors. We are already Bangladesh. We are already starting a connectivity with Nepal. We are discussing it at a very advanced stage. Probably with Myanmar, we might go ahead with that. And we have already got some connectivity with other countries. So what we plan to do is, of course, there is a very ambitious program of United Nations which is connecting Europe and Asia through road. There is already a connection. In fact, some trains go from Asia to Europe. There is already a regular cargo service which is running between Germany and China. So there is already connection, but there is going to be a better and bigger ambitious program. So I hope we'll also be participating in that over a period of time.
Good. Is there anyone else? Yes, Deep, please. There's a mic on your table.
Deep Kapuria. There is, what has evolved in Singapore is that over time it has also become a hub for startups, and specifically the tech startups. And we see a lot of our own youngsters converging to Singapore in many ways, not only to access capital, but in other sense as well because of the ecosystem. And it's literally competing vis-a-vis, we call it the London ecosystem or even the Berlin ecosystem. So I think this is one of the points which our government and Prime Minister has been focusing on startups. And we see in our recent past that there's a huge upsurge of the startups coming up. And Singapore has also established itself through sovereign funds, which in many ways is helping fund a few of the projects. Can we focus something on the startups, and how can we learn more? This will be a question to both of you. Thank you.
Well, the startup space is a very broad space, so it depends where you're focusing. But I'm glad you think that Singapore is a good place for startups, but it's something that we are continuing to work at. Part of the reason that it needs regular and consistent effort is because if you take, for example, a space like fintech, fintech is not just about the technology or some clever algorithms. This is an important part of the value proposition, but it has to be married with a regulatory environment that allows the startup to test out the ideas and in a controlled setting, if possible, from a regulator's point of view, so that they can validate what they're doing before it can be commercially scaled. If you look at it from a regulator's perspective, in fintech, for example, they have to find the balance between maintaining the system stability, because fundamentally they're accountable for the financial system stability, and then at the same time allowing for these kinds of innovations, which if you lose sight of them, they might completely disrupt your existing players in the space. So I think what Singapore offers is a destination or a venue where many ideas can be curated, and we want to see how we can continually make that attractive. So it's capital is one side of it, but quite frankly, I think it's more than capital. It's really about the enabling environment for the ideas to be taken to practical outcomes and to see whether, because as they say, you want to fail fast and fail smart, right? So you want to know very quickly whether an idea works, or if it doesn't work, you want to be able to learn from that failure and then apply it to the next solution. So that's really the context of a lot of the work. So I would say, if you're talking about collaboration between India and I know in India there's some very notable efforts to promote the startup space, and I've been tracking that as well. I would say actually the potential really is more about collaboration, because I think if you're trying to do something, for example, I'm using fintech again because it's a good example. You can do it in cybersecurity elsewhere. It doesn't make sense to talk about a cybersecurity solution that works in Singapore or in America, because these must be global solutions, which means you need the connectivity and the link up in order to be able to work in different jurisdictions and make it and test it out. So I think the potential really is for collaborative innovation, and to see how, for example, if you're a startup in India, you may want to see if you can create a platform in Singapore so that you can test it out across 2 or maybe other more jurisdictional areas and so on. So I think that's really where the most important space is for startups and innovation. And the capital, I think, will follow that quite naturally. Once they know that this is where projects are being developed and companies are growing, that's what will happen. I don't know whether
In fact, I agree with him fully. Typically, if any established player has to look at how good is a startup, he's going to say it's worst, because he's going to be out of the business soon when the startups come to fore. So therefore, what really government should do is to create this enabling environment. What Singapore and India could do probably is even startup needs scaling up. And at that time, probably a bigger platform, bigger visibility, acceptability, providing the angel funding as well as venture capital funding, all of that, which in fact, one of the reasons why Silicon Valley is the most successful place to have startup is because the entire ecosystem is in place there. So I think probably such types could be made in which ecosystem need not necessarily be confined only to one country. Maybe some part of that ecosystem can be done in Singapore, and that is something which we should really look at. But the startup being normally, not always, but most of the time, being very disruptive in nature, that they try to disrupt the existing businesses substantially. Therefore, getting anybody saying that whether it's my idea is a good idea is going to know it's not a good idea, because he said, firstly, if it's a good idea, I'm going to think I'm a successful person. Why I didn't think myself if it was such a good idea? So therefore, we must, as you correctly said, we should be providing enabling environment to take it to a fore. And probably this is a very good idea to collaborate with Singapore on this, because they are certain institutions which are so strong, globally respected. You have a system in which enterprise is fully allowed to blossom. And I think that's something we should try to take advantage of. I suppose India is trying to move on to the chain of ease of doing business substantially. We are also trying to improve our standing in terms of competitiveness, but still long way to go as compared to Singapore. So probably a startup in India could take advantage of that ecosystem available within Singapore, and we can collaborate.
Great. Yeah, any last question, please. Please go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Suvash Goel. Specifically to Mr. Prabhu, is there any specific collaboration that has taken place between Indian Railways and Singapore? Any projects which are in the pipeline or about to be executed? Or is there a time frame, or is there something maturing?
With Singapore, as I said, there are many areas which will go just beyond one sector. For example, infrastructure financing is one area in which we need the paper which is required, the instrument, financial instrument, which has to be long-term in maturity, which must have appetite, which people will only understand, like pension funds and others. So Singapore being a home to many of these global pension funds, global even sovereign wealth funds operate from there, and it's also a recognized and respected financial market. I think that's one area. Secondly, on real estate development, the city development, urban development, Singapore is acknowledged leader. So I think there again we can collaborate. So we have been having discussion. I'm sure soon we'll take this relationship to a new level. Tomorrow, both Prime Ministers will be meeting. So I think they will also take it forward. But I'm very happy that we have Honorable Minister here to prepare for that particular dialogue. And I think we can really take it forward. We're just having some conversation. And it is definitely possible, knowing each other's strength and also the requirement, that there's so much can be accomplished.
So I would just add, I think you've got to look at it both in terms of verticals or spaces where we can do things together. So whether it is smart city type of ideas, and when you say smart city, what does that mean? So it can mean water solutions, it can mean certain types of transport engineering solutions, and it can also mean, talking specifically about Mr. Prabhu's portfolio, for example, the railway plan, and I know there's an emphasis on transport-oriented development around the nodes. And whilst our MRT system is much smaller than yours, but the principles are the same, because it's really about how you leverage the volume of traffic, people traffic, and the footfall, and turn that into an opportunity in terms of developments that will complement that and take advantage of that and create value for the city and also for the businesses that are engaged. So I think that's an important area, and there are, I think, many others we can talk about. So the verticals and specific opportunities are important. And I think in the area of financing, I think Singapore can be a good, valuable source of investment and funds flow into India in terms of some of these priority sectors. Because it's not just about where the pools of funds are, it's also about having the knowledge and the connectivity to be able to, make the linkages and have the funds channeled appropriately to get best possible outcomes from an investor's point of view, and from the host country's point of view, channeled to where the needs are greatest. So I think that's where locations, or in the case of India, the partnership with Singapore, I think, can be quite valuable, because you already have a very strong base from which we can, in terms of mutual understanding, that can be used for some of these other activities.
So, ladies and gentlemen, that was a great overview of how we could collaborate further between our two countries, how we can strengthen our collaboration. We saw in each of the new missions that one has seen in the last 2 years that has come up in India, from Make in India to a Digital India to even Swachh Bharat, to all of it that one sees. and our focus in areas like infrastructure, people building, we see a great role that we can have between our two countries, especially Singapore's collaboration with India. And this coming in the eve of the discussions that we all look forward to tomorrow, I think is of great value to our both our countries and specifically to both our businesses. And we have indeed a very strong team that has come from the Singapore as a Singapore business delegation. The type of business to business discussions that we have had has been truly very exciting. I'll wrap up this part of the evening, as we have some MOUs also to be conducted, by thanking our two honorable ministers for participating with us. But before I do so, I'll request Mr. Suresh Prabhu and then Mr. Easwaran to give any last quick comments that you might have as we wrap this evening up.
As I said, the potential of this relationship is huge. I would feel that we are not even scratched the surface. So much can be done together between Singapore and India bilaterally, and with Singapore as a partner, with multilaterally, with several countries in the region in a very significant way. So I think the opportunities are immense, and luckily the understanding between Singapore and India is phenomenal. There's one country who understands India probably as good as anybody else is Singapore. So I think we are very happy that you are here, and we look forward to working with you. And with Singapore we can do many things. I remember your former Prime Minister saying that there are two wings to an aircraft. One is India, one is China, so we have to fly. So that's what you believe in. So I think now we are really on the way to take a high trajectory of growth. And in such time, Singapore as a partner would really help us a great deal. So looking forward to that. Thank you very much.
I would just sit on. Yeah. I would just add, we start from a very strong foundation in terms of the relationship between the two countries. Whether you take it at the political level, which is very strong mutual understanding, and our Prime Minister's visit, which starts officially tomorrow, and Prime Minister Modi visited us last year. These are part of the ongoing high-level engagement that we have, and it's a reflection of the strong ties, politically and also at the business level and at the people level. I think the next point I would make is I think there are good opportunities for both sides to work together on. Those opportunities are defined by, on the one hand, India's priorities and areas of emphasis in policy and in the way your economy is evolving. It's also defined by, I think, where Singapore's capabilities are and some of the developments in our own part of the world in terms of Southeast Asia and Asia, which creates opportunities for Indian businesses as well. And thirdly, I would say the way forward really is focusing our efforts. So in the conversations with the government ministers and agencies, I've emphasized that it's important to take, for example, the idea of smart cities and break it down into specific areas where the two parties can then engage at a more detailed level. And I think that is where the two business communities also can play a very important role, because you focus on the opportunities specifically and turn them into action. And I think that's where we should be putting a lot more of our effort as we look ahead.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. We move to the next session.
I have the privilege to announce the 3 MOUs that are being signed now. The first one is between the Confederation of Indian Industry and the Singapore Business Federation for enhancement of business relations between India and Singapore. May I request Ms. Shobna Kamineni, President-designate CII, and Mr. S.S. Theo, Chairman, Singapore Business Federation, to please come and do the honors. A brief background: the Singapore Business Federation, SBF, is the apex business chamber championing the interests of the Singapore business community in the areas of trade, investment, and industrial relations. It represents 22,500 companies as well as key local and foreign business chambers. CII is an industry-led and industry-managed organization playing a proactive role in India's development process. Founded in 1895, India's premier business association has over 8,000 members from private as well as public sectors, including SMEs and MNCs, and an indirect membership of over 200,000 enterprises from around 240 national and regional sectoral industry bodies. Please join me in congratulating them. The second MOU is between Sigma's Management Services Limited, SMSL, and Apollo Logi Solutions Limited. The signatories for this, again, are Mr. S.S. Teo, Director of SMSL, and Mr. R.K. Gupta, CFO, Apollo Logi Solutions Limited. May I request Mr. Gupta and Mr. Teo to kindly do the honors. Sigmas is a subsidiary of PIL Group. It is a leading manufacturer of containers, operators of terminals and container depots, and provider of logistics services. Apollo Logi Solutions Limited in India is engaged in the business of offering complete and comprehensive logistics services relating to container freight stations. The third and final MOU to be signed is between Pacific International Lines and Apollo Logi Solutions Limited on containers freight stations in India. The signatories, Mr. S.S. Teo, Managing Director of PIL, and Mr. R.K. Gupta, CFO, Apollo Logi Solutions Limited. Pacific International Lines Group in Singapore operates a range of maritime-related businesses spanning from international shipping, containers manufacturing, and other logistics services. Apollo Logi Solutions is engaged in the business of offering complete and comprehensive logistics services relating to container freight station, inland container depots, freight forwarding, custom brokerage, warehousing, and allied services. And with that, we come to the close of the three MOUs. Can we hear it for all the three of them, please? May I now request Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General CII, to present a token of appreciation to Mr. S. Easwaran, Minister of Trade and Industry, Government of Singapore, for being here with us. May I now invite Mr. S.S. Teo, Chairman SBF, to present a memento to Mr. Suresh Prabhu, Minister for Railways, Government of India. May I now request Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General CI, to present a memento to Mr. S.S. Teo, Chairman SBF. I invite Mr. S.S. Teo, Chairman SBF, to present a memento to Mr. Chandrajit Banerjee, Director General CII. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to a close of this session. May I invite, to close the session, Mr. Gautam Banerjee, Vice Chairman SBF and Chairman and Senior Managing Director, Blackstone Singapore, to please come and give the vote of thanks.
His Excellency Mr. S. Ishwaran, Minister for Trade and Industry of the Government of Singapore, His Excellency Mr. Suresh Prabhu, Minister for Railways of the Government of India, esteemed friends from the Confederation of Indian Industries, members of the Singapore Business and Official Delegation, good evening. We've come to the end of a short but substantive and punchy Singapore-India Business Forum. It's very interesting that the sessions, both the panel that we had featuring business leaders from Singapore and India, and the discussion that we've just concluded featuring two leaders, one from Singapore and one from India, actually talked about similar things. I mean, the very long, close, and warm relationship between the two countries, which has been built on very pragmatic on pragmatic basis and for mutual benefit and cooperation, which has withstood the test of time. It keeps growing, and events like this, where we have business delegations visiting from one country, memorandums of understanding being signed, which deepens collaboration, deepens the working level arrangements between the two countries, and takes this relationship to even higher levels. So I think we've also over the years seen the relationship move to higher levels, and I think the signing of CICA 10 years ago, the double tax treaty, these were all facilitators to help the relationship grow, both at the political level as well as the relationship between between companies and opportunities between companies to work with each other. Well, as you know, CICA is being amended. The double tax treaty needs to be also reviewed because it was built on the India-Mauritius treaty, and that treaty has been revised. But I would urge the leaders of both countries to bear in mind this very close relationship which has benefited both countries, to bear that in mind when CICA is negotiated and when the double tax treaty is being negotiated, because there could be unintended consequences arising from changing things which have worked very well. You know, I think we have two very eminent ministers, and even though Mr. Prabhu is Minister for Railways, I know he's a chartered accountant. I've dealt with him before, and he understands finances and business very well. And you know, what's happened in the last few years is that Singapore has built up a community, and this is not just Singaporean companies, but global companies who have used Singapore as the place from which business and investments have come into Singapore and to India. And you know, that ecosystem may be jeopardized if we kind of change things which have worked well. So I hope that you take that into account. That's my real plug for this evening. I've been doing this for a while, but I think it's something which is very important. And you know, sometimes you change things, and then you realize that that momentum that you've built up suddenly disappears. So. Ministers, please, I know you'll do your very best, and I just urge you to do that for the business community. I now have just the task of thanking the two leaders to have, for you to have spent some time with us. I think this really capped off the business forum, and also the panelists earlier who were very forthright and shared their experiences, and I think it was a very robust discussion. I would also like to thank Standard Chartered Bank for being the sponsor of this forum. To our friends at CII for organizing this, let's give them a round of applause. And finally, to all of you, to have spent this afternoon and evening with us and to have made this forum so successful. Have a good evening, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen.